This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Some people, I think, are surprised by the behavior of wild animals. I'd like to say that I've never been surprised by them. I have been. Now, I think that it's because, our species, the human species, we have order about us. But, animals have an order too. But it's when you get a collection of animals together and maybe they do something that is not just odd, but scary. It really makes you question your own reality, I think. And I think that can be applied sometimes to the behavior of humans. You get them together in a group, and we hear about things like groupthink and all that, but you get a group together, and they have a purpose. They have their own constitution, if you will. And what if their document, though it might not be written, their agreement that they've entered into, its foundational element is violence. And violence that is directed toward the most defenseless, maybe the weakest, those that don't have an ability to fight back. Today, we're going to delve into very troubled waters here. We're going to take a deep dive into a case that has become known as the Gilbert Goons. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. There was a movie, I guess it came out, I guess it was probably in the 80s. It had Nicolas Cage in it, but it featured Kathleen Turner, and it was Peggy Sue Got Married. I love that movie, yeah. Dave. And there's a
Francis
line.
Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
Why did he go with that voice? Why was Nick Cage doing that voice as the young guy?
I know, but that's Cage. That's the way he rolls. Yeah. There was a comment though that was made. I don't know if you recall this. Peggy Sue, of course, had gone back in time. She wanted to relive her life, and she was interacting with a guy that was kind of a hipster, beatnik kind of guy, rode a motorcycle, and she approaches him back in time. She knew him back then. And she had gone back to her high school days. And anyway, he made a comment as they're having coffee. He looks at her and he says, I thought that chicks like you only travel in packs. And it was a real tell,
Yep.
And she looks at him and says, well, I'm a hip chick. I make my own way. But, Dave, there are people out there that I think, they're drawn to traveling around in a group many times. And it is groupthink, and it can be very, very dangerous. And, of course, this discussion that we're having today deals with a group of teenagers that got together and escalated from essentially assault and battery to now homicide. And I don't know that any of us really saw that coming here.
The thing about the Gilbert Goons, it's Gilbert, Arizona. See, there's one incident that took place during a Halloween party back in October when 16-year-old Preston Lord was at a party that had there were a bunch of kids. A lot of kids. As a matter of fact, 911 had been called several times because there were so many cars in the neighborhood. It was a residential neighborhood. A lot of kids just doing what teenage kids do. And Preston Lord, 16-year-old kid, he'd only been 16 for a month. And he was there with some of his friends. The Gilbert Goons are the group of football player, cheerleaders, that whole rigmarole of the so-called popular rich kids. And One of them snatched a cheap gold necklace off of Preston Lord's friend. Not Preston Lord, off of a friend of his who he was there at the party with. It was a cheap necklace, Joe. It had nothing to but one of the Gilbert Goons wanted it and took it. Wanted to start a fight is what it amounted to, and that's what they did. Preston Lord defended his friend. Said, give me that back. What are you doing? And rather than be good people about anything, they attacked him. And that, well, I say they, it wasn't one. It wasn't the guy who snatched the necklace. It was that guy and every other friend they had there that wanted to take a pot shot at a 16-year-old kid who had been beaten to the ground and then pummeled, kicked. They beat him in every way you could. And then, as he's laying unconscious on the cement, these guys laid on top of him and act like they were humping to make sure they got it all on video.
Yeah, and let me interject here, because that, as vicious as the beatdown was, and look, I'll go ahead and bury the lead here and say that it's a lethal beatdown, and we'll get to that. But when I saw, and this is in a number of publications, I've heard people talk about it in interviews. When you get to this idea of they're humping and they're on top of me, you know, I was referring to the animal kingdom a few moments ago.
Right.
I wanted to throw this out to you, Dave, and you've probably seen this. Did you know that dogs, in order to demonstrate dominance, they will actually hump, and it's regardless of sex of the other animal. They will, in order to demonstrate their dominance, they will actually hump on a weaker animal, or an animal that's been essentially defeated in a fight.
Right.
And I found that element to this absolutely fascinating. It was almost like the accused in this case, this group, have become feral. You know, and I don't know. Wow. I was really struck by that. And on top of that, you know, and this is in the midst of, you know, as you had stated, they had beat this poor kid down. Mm-hmm. I mean, beat him down in public, and then they videotaped it, which is just,
the beating that's been a big part of who they are. That's why, Joe, when I first got this story of what happened to Preston Lord on this night, and I thought, you've got the weaker kid getting beaten by the football team. And now it's not what happened at all. This group of young people that had been labeled the Gilbert Goons had been out terrorizing people for a couple of years in Gilbert, Arizona. They had been publicly attacking people, physically attacking them, and videotaping it and talking about it in their group. And the reason they got labeled the Gilbert Goons is because they kept getting away with it. The reason they kept getting away with it because, well, you know what? First of all, they're kids. Second of all, kids will be kids. And you know, the minute you tell on that kid, some parents can legitimately hold their children accountable and won't let them run wild like that.
Right.
But those aren't the parents you have a problem with. The parents you have a problem with are the parents who will take a child that is capable of beating a person to death and then hiding them in an $850,000 lake house until their hands heal, so the police won't see the guy's bloody knuckles, so they can deny he ever was there and lay it on somebody who doesn't have as much money as they do, which is what happened here. So it's not just burying the lead to say they killed Preston Lord. That was the culmination of years of abuse that the Gilbert Goons, this group of high school students, put onto an entire community. You mentioned the humping, the animals humping out in the Wild Kingdom. All right. The movie Mean Girls, with Lindsay Lohan, and anyway, there's a scene. She had been raised in Africa by her professor smart parents, and they came to the United States, and she kept remembering back how things would be handled in the jungle, how the animals would handle these situations around the watering hole. And these, these high school students would then act out how they would be acting if they were animals.
The same behavior.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's striking. I don't know if
yes.
I don't know. Can you say I had a Lindsay Lohan moment there for a second? I don't know. It kind of, it was reminiscent of, something that you might see a group of feral animals do. And look, I'm going to interject here. I don't normally do this, but I found something that I want to give our friends just a perspective on. And just let me run down this list very quickly. Just indulge me a bit, Dave. So I'm going to go all the way back to November 22nd of 2022. And this list goes, I was amazed at the length of this list, but just let me lay this on you for a second. First pops onto the radar, November 22nd, 2022, a juvenile is assaulted outside of a home in Gilbert. We move forward now to December the 3rd of 2022. A group of people assaulted an adult in a parking garage in Gilbert. On the 16th of December, same year, there was an assault on a victim in Gilbert. 17th, an assault again in Gilbert, and there's a reoccurring theme here. There's kind of this address. There's an address that's near Higley and Elliott Road. Then we go to December 30th. A 17-year-old that goes by the name of Connor Jarnigan. He was assaulted while in his vehicle while a group of youths outside an In-N-Out Burger on Market Street near Williamsville Road in Santan Village Parkway. He was left bloodied, and he required staples in his head. May 29th, 2023, a minor. Again, it's amazing. You don't hear like they didn't run down to Fort Huachuca and pick on active duty Army guys, did they? Nope. We've got a minor that was assaulted May 29th, 2023. We've got another one, and that wasn't reported to the police. We've got one from July 6th of 2023. An 18-year-old was accused of vehicular assault in connection with an incident that left a victim injured. August 18th, 2023, a group of youths violently attacked a minor again at the In-N-Out Burger. October 28th, we get to Preston. And so you'd mentioned that this was adjacent to or had occurred approximating a Halloween party. Mm-hmm. He's assaulted outside of this location where this occurred. And then, of course, on October the 30th, Preston passed away, Dave. And I don't, it's like this. We cover so many cases, and I think I don't want to put words in my friend's mouth here, but I got to say, we cover a lot of cases that not a lot of planning go into, and some of the stuff is really bizarre, but many times it's because people fall off the handle, and it's a one-time event. On body bags, we talk about things many times that are really over the top. But Dave, we're demonstrating linear time here. We've got a timeline that goes back this distance, and you're thinking, who does this sort of thing, particularly in Gilbert, Arizona? This is it's just off the beam.
If this was your child, your grandchild, a 16-year-old is murdered by a group of teenagers that feel so entitled that they can beat him to death on the road. No one concerned. Nobody there stopping. That's what bothers me, Joe, is we're at this point where we have a story of a 16-year-old boy who went to a party with a bunch of other high school kids, and they beat him to death. They beat him to death, Joe.
And you have
How
to
do
think,
you die from getting hit in the head? I mean, really, I'm kind of curious as to what actually happened physiologically, because I've had a few beatdowns in my life. How bad does it have to be for you to actually die? That's something we've got to get into, because I can't figure it out.
And we will. But, Dave, there's one little piece to this that I'm very curious about. You begin to think about the level of violence that we're talking about over a protracted period of time, I have to wonder, are we talking about a group of people that allowed this to happen because they wanted to be entertained at a very primal level? Or were they just simply gutless and didn't want to interdict the situation? There's a fatigue that sets in after you've got a punch of adrenaline in your system. And some people have this, stimulation of adrenaline for a variety of different reasons. But when you, and here's this word again, when you get into this kind of primal state, I think, and you're being driven on by group violence, you sustain that adrenaline maybe a little bit longer. But here's the thing, Dave. When you're talking about a group of people that are assaulting one individual, if one person gets tired, then the other one picks up where that guy left off, and they have a full tank of energy at that point in time.
Right.
And if you think about this with this poor Preston kid, it was repeated over and over and over again. And the amount of trauma that he sustained would have been, and as it's proven out to be, he was in a, as pilots refer to it, a flat spin, unrecoverable. There was no chance that he would pull out of it.
I wondered, Joe, when seeing some of the videos associated with this case, because there were so many cameras or phones out taking video. And a lot of that was part of it is the guys, they were performing for a camera. They're performing for the audience that was watching them. And again, I go back to nobody willing to stand in the gap. There was nobody willing to stand up for the guy who had been knocked down. And because of that, the hitting and the beating, it just continued on. Now, look, one thing that we do need to make sure we're clear on, it took a while, but the Gilbert Goons, at least part of the gang, has now been outed because of the death of Preston Lord. And now they are going to be held to account to some degree, if that can be. I don't know if there is any justice when you murder a 16-year-old child in the middle of the street, but at least there will be some comeuppance. And maybe the people of Gilbert who have been terrorized by this group of entitled idiots will actually get some of their town back. It's like something out of a movie, Joe. It's like,
yeah, and right you are, and I'm glad you said that because I don't I don't know if our friends are aware of this, but this was a Halloween party, and this group were dressed as if they were members of the Peaky Blinders gang from the television series, and so when you couple that, which is based on an actual group from England post World War I, of these guys that got together and they formed a kind of an organized crime syndicate. There's a level of intimidation that comes along with that, and I think that. And isn't it fascinating too? And I don't want to get too deep into the psychology here. It's really not my area, but it's almost like you're advertising it. Mm-hmm. That you would be so bold because up to this point, when we think about that night when Preston was fatally attacked, it turned out to be a fatal attack. You had them leading up and forming this core group, and you think about what they're seeing in the media. And I don't know if it had been back in the 50s, maybe they would have had an awareness of the Mau Mau's, in New York City, or some other gang, LA, any of the number of the gangs there, that we heard about in the 80s. But you've got this thing that's coming across with, I'm not blaming television here. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying, but it's a template You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that they would be so bold. It's almost like they're advertising this. And, people say, well, who are you dressed as? Why do you look like my pictures of my great grandfather? Oh, we're Peaky Blinders. That's who we are. And you show up as a group like that.
Right. That's the key, though. It's the groupthink. When my kids were growing up, and I never gave them a curfew. So they know what I expect of them. I figure they're going to do some things I don't hear about, but the things I do hear about are scary enough. But I never gave them a curfew, and I always made them drive. I don't want you driving drunk. Don't be stupid. I expected better than that, but I always made them drive. And the reason is you can always leave and come home. If something's going weird, you can leave and come home. I don't want you to ever have an excuse. This is, I was with Joe. I couldn't leave. And so my children grew up knowing that was their responsibility to take themselves out of the situation. But the teens out in Gilbert, these Gilbert Goons, they had parents that were indulging them. They had parents that were saying, you get into trouble, I'm getting you out of it. So I wonder how much I go back to the Brady Bunch, when she was being picked on by a bully at school because of her lisp. And when Mike went over to talk to Buddy, his dad, found out Buddy's dad was a bully,
Right.
And I have a feeling that that's where these entitled rich kids came from, an entitled rich group of parents who just felt like this is our town and we're going to do whatever we want. We're going to cover up our kids' mess. The police go along with it. At least they did. And there has been a lot of screaming about a cover-up, Joe. But bottom line, the charges are out. The charges are real. And the charges are, these young people are going to be held account for what they did, at least on that one night. I don't know what happened with any of the other crimes.
What's really interesting about this, Dave, is that the feds got involved in this case. And I find that fascinating. You've got the FBI that's entering onto the stage here. If we view this like Shakespeare would have, the players entering in and off the stage, as he had stated. That's, of course, paraphrased by Morgan here. But you think about the FBI coming into this, how, they get involved in organized crime. They get involved in underworld things, among other things. Mm-hmm. But if they have the ability, they being that organization, to come in to this, and obviously they've been consulted by the locals, because most of the time the FBI is not going to get involved in a local matter unless the locals ask them to come in. Unless it's a federal violation, then they can take the initiative. But, the FBI starts to look at this thing, and they're hearing probably about this idea that we're not talking about a singular person that's roaming the streets. And, this thing that, at the time of this taping that we're seeing that's occurring, that's manifesting in certain big cities where people just walk up and just randomly hit people. This is not that. This is like a group of people that have entered into some kind of confederation where their sole purpose for existence is to egg one another on in these acts of violence. And I got to tell you, I'm so sad that Preston died, but I'm glad that they being the authorities, finally broke out the bracelets and put them on somebody's wrist, because this could have escalated even further than it did. The high school that I went to, our high school was in fact known for the number of college players that we produced in football, and a lot of NFL players as well came out of my high school. And high school football was a big part of my life. I played on the team. I was not that great, but it was kind of an honor to be part of that group coming up through JV and varsity. And, Dave, there's a tie back here in the quote unquote Gilbert Goons case to high school football. And we had discussed this previously. I would please fill in the blanks for me a little bit here and just kind of tell me what happened, because this is, out of all things, this is really demonstrative of, I think, the boldness of an accused perpetrator, that they would still be performing at or living their life at this level, and not just the athlete, but also those individuals that they were surrounded by that were facilitating this. I don't know that I can plumb the depths of it, really.
Plumb the depths is probably the right phrase. When, it was the award. It was the football award that got a lot of people's attention. I haven't been shocked at that. I've been surprised that it got out there. And the reason was when you actually dig into this a little bit, okay, you find out that all of the people involved, from those who administered the punishment and were totally unrepentant, even after the young man died, their parents getting involved, even making jokes about, my mom once they would send a picture of the FBI reward money for information leading to, and one of the guys involved in the
$10,000. Yeah.
And one guy said, my mom wants to use my video to collect the money, because she knew. So you got parents knowing what their children did and covering up, to the point where one of these big guys on November 23rd is awarded. He's named it was November 10th, rather, not, I think I said 23rd. It was November 10th. Okay. Now think about it. This party happened on October 28th. Preston Lord died 2 days later. And 11 days after that, one of the guys involved in the beating, Renner, was named Player of the Week at the November 10th, 2023 game. Was allowed to play football beyond. They all knew what had happened, but everybody knew about the fight. The coaches knew about the fight. They all knew about the fight. They all knew who was involved in the fight. But Travis Renner was not only allowed to play in the game, but he was awarded with the Player of the Week honors.
I think that on top of this, we've got a young man who has just absolutely been beaten down. And one of the kind of really disturbing elements to this is that this individual that was involved in this, that was a football player, he actually, this is heartbreaking. He actually bragged allegedly over the fact that Preston, and just think about if his parents heard about this at the time, that Preston had to have a closed casket funeral, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I begin to think about, I'd mentioned, using that term I'm off to use with plumbing the depths, because sometimes things are beyond description. What debased level do you have to sink to in order to find joy in that? There's no contrition in this whatsoever. And, this kind of cold absence of any kind of empathy or sympathy, it's devoid of that. And, Preston at that moment in time became an object. And, look, when you're talking about the way he is being assaulted, I think is very important to understand too, the dynamic, because out of Preston's little group that he was with at that party that night, his group was terrified and they fled. But the one thing that they apparently caught a glimpse of, and they looked back, Preston is being assaulted. They stated that it looked like 11 to 15 people that were essentially engaging in this, kind of taking turns or observing. And, when you've got a group of people that are assaulting him, they do talk extensively about him being kicked in the abdomen and what can happen as a result of this type of blunt force trauma. And I'm simply focusing on the abdomen right now.
That's right, Joe. I'm not interrupting. I want to point that out, because that's what got me. I thought, I know that he died and I know the overall, but I've been hit in the head. I've been hit in the back. I've been hit in the gut. And I will tell you that getting hit in the stomach and being pummeled there's a lot of stuff going on there that you can do a lot of damage to somebody where they can't get up.
Yeah, there is, and look, he's going to have closed head injuries too. He'll have multiple contusions all over his body. These little focal areas, these little strike points, and they're going to all look a little bit different. But let's just kind of talk about the abdomen right now, because I've had cases where people have sustained severe blunt force trauma in the abdomen. Many times you'll see it. Particularly in motor vehicle accidents, if you have an unbelted subject. And there are a lot of these kind of, you can have tears in the mesentery, what they refer to, and the gut itself is covered in blood vessels. And one of the reasons that trauma surgery involving the gut is so difficult to kind of perform is that there are all these little microvessels that are contained in there. And if one of these things gets ruptured, you might not be able to assess precisely where the bleed is. And a lot of it's going to be dependent upon how long it took for Preston in his unconscious state to be transported from the scene to a hospital where they could begin to render care. And if you again begin to marry those insults in his stomach to whatever he sustained, perhaps also in the chest, and in addition, certainly in the head, you can have an individual that won't show a single drop of blood externally, okay? But you can have these little tears that are taking place throughout the body. Now, it's important to understand that Preston essentially lingered for 2 days in that hospital, and many people, probably can identify with this. I'm sure that some of our friends possibly can, what it's like to go to the bedside of a loved one in ICU. They're unconscious. You've got all this machinery around you. And can you imagine, you don't get up one morning and realize that, you don't have this moment in time where you realize that, okay, today's the last time I'm going to see my 16-year-old son, who's just, by the way, turned 16, in an upright state of orientation where we can make eye contact and we can talk, and he has his faculties. But who wakes up one morning and has that thought that this will be the last time I talk to this child? And the event itself would have been so markedly painful. It's almost, on one level, it's almost merciful that he lost consciousness, I think. And the trauma would have been so extensive. We're not talking about somebody that came in with lead pipes or baseball bats or anything like this. We're talking about teenagers who use their hands, their fist rather, and their feet in order to attack him. And many times with these kinds of events, which I've seen individuals that have literally been kicked to death, you don't only have kicking, but you have stomping that goes on too. And I'm going to be very curious to see from an evidentiary standpoint if Preston's body reveals any kind of pattern injuries that we might see, say, related to the sole of a shoe, which you can actually see on the soft portion, the belly itself. You can actually see this. And many times, now, just so that folks understand, if you have, say, the sole of a shoe on bare skin, you'll have this kind of, you'll have a contusion or bruise, but it'll also have an abraded pattern to it. But if you're clothed, you might not be able to pick up on the pattern of the shoe, but you can see the outline of a shoe perhaps, or get that kind of idea. And wouldn't that be really incredible for the investigators if they can tie that back to, say, shoe sizes? If they have videography in a case like this, they can look at each one of these strikes. If those strikes that they have videotape of, now just follow my logic here, if those strikes that they have videotape of are demonstrated in court, and you have a forensic pathologist that says, okay, he had an underlying hemorrhage that was specific to this area. And if you'll look at frame such and such, you can see this individual right here struck this blow. Whereas you might have somebody else that just walked up and slapped him. It doesn't mean that they're not guilty. It just means that you can actually pin this to an individual that either struck him multiple times, or you've got a connectivity through video evidence of him being struck in a specific area that led to a major bleed that wound up in Preston's death, of course.
Now, when Preston was taken to the ground, and I've wondered this, again, because none of his friends stayed. They fled in fear. I don't hold them in any way. I'm not 16, and I don't know what I would have done. But I think about how quickly was Preston Lord overcome? How quickly, when we're talking about 10 to 15 people that are piling on, how quickly was he unable to defend himself anymore? It had to be fairly quick.
Yeah. And again, if you've ever been, okay, it doesn't necessarily.
By the way, a real fight is nothing like in the movies. You get hit 2 or 3 times in the head, you can't name yourself.
You
and you get exhausted real fast too. You're breathing heavy and sweating within 30 seconds.
Right.
And when you've got guys taking turns.
Yeah. And again, they're fresh. And it's not like Preston is somebody like a professional fighter that knows how to take a blow.
Right.
Okay. Because if you've been in the ring, boxers, UFC people, they know actually how to take a blow. Now, you can see them knock silly. There's all kinds of videos like that are out there. However, you get a kid that's this defenseless, and he's beset on all sides by a pack of teenagers that are kicking him and hitting him simultaneously. And I don't necessarily think that this is done in a vacuum where it's like, okay, person A, it's your turn. It's your turn now. It's your turn. No, they're attacking him simultaneously. And I don't know. I think that just thinking about this, I think that there was probably a level of giddiness and laughter that was probably going on around this, not being able to appreciate, for whatever reason, I don't know, the path that they're headed down with this young man. And then again, with, Preston's group had talked about the number of people that were involved in this and as they're fleeing. And I'm really thinking, out of that big group of people, you're going to tell me that there were not 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people that had one single iota of compassion and wanted to display mercy and extend mercy to Preston. Instead, it took weeks and weeks and weeks to finally effect the arrest. But let me tell you something. Justice is coming, and we'll find out all of the details when it does. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.